This is the story of building schools for the future, creating the learning environments for the next generation. By the year 2020, at least half of all existing secondary schools will have been knocked down and rebuilt. And all others will have been remodelled and modernised.
The main driving philosophy of the whole of the BFS is to bring about a transformation in educational standards in teaching and learning, right? This is an education program, even though the word building is there and it is about building. Let's not make any mistakes. This is a program to improve standards.
But despite all the grand designs, it's still a voyage into the unknown.
It's only now that as the first wave of BSF is beginning to roll off the production line, that people are really sort of producing studies into actually what education in the 21st century is going to be all about. There was exemplar schemes produced by architects, which were fascinating and interesting, but I personally don't think any of them really produced a 21st century amazing school, almost because it's an impossible brief. How can we predict the future?
Building schools for the future does present one certainty: a huge expansion of the private sector in the running of schools. A development that's enraging those who believe education should not be run for financial profit.
I think there's a lot of problems about that. I fundamentally believe, so do most people in this country, I think as well, fundamentally believe that education should be a service, should not be for profit, and it should be provided by the public sector.
We'll be exploring what the future might hold with the help of two secondary schools that are being rebuilt as part of BSF. The Whitfield Fishponds Community School in Bristol and the Smithswood Secondary School at Chelmsley Wood in the West Midlands. We'll be hearing about their aspirations and asking whether the process is neglecting two important groups in this project: the pupils and the staff. The Whitfield Fishponds School will be one of the first to face the bulldozers. The new school has been planned and is already built in the mind of the head teacher.
Well, if you look to the left of that building now, where the playing fields are and the turning area for cars is, that will be the site of the new school. What we've tried to design into the new school is that wow moment from the minute you come through the gate.
Meanwhile, at the Smithswood School, there's already a wow moment every time high winds cause the main building to sway from side to side. It's a feature they won't be keeping.
When it's windy, the building actually sways, and when you have rain and wind and aircraft from the airport going across, it makes for an interesting experience. The younger ones, of course, the year sevens, they've never experienced this before, so this sometimes can cause almost a hysteria.
We'll also be visiting one school that's seen as a great example of the shape of things to come, although it has been likened to a prison.
Many people have said that there are some similarities between the design of this and a prison, but if you ask our children, they love being here, and I think that's what matters at the end of the day.
Building schools for the future will involve every secondary and at least half of all primaries over the next 15 years. Pathfinder projects are well underway in Bristol and Bradford, where 8 schools are being rebuilt. Another 40 schools are due to be next in 10 areas that form the first wave. The work will cost £2.2 billion every year for the next 4 years, when funding will be reviewed. It's expected that each new secondary school will cost between £20 and £30 million. Half of all the money will come from the government, and half from business consortiums through private finance initiatives.
In the past, there was so little money in the system that the expectations were low. And you would go to some schools, and if you had a conversation with a head, if you had 2 or 3 million or 5 million, what would you do? And if they had a roof which didn't leak or a boiler which worked, they would have been quite happy. But this is much more than that.
At Whitfield and Smithswood, the head teachers have different approaches, but they have one thing in common. They'll both be glad to see the back of their existing school buildings.
Look at our present entrance. It doesn't say to you, you're now at Whitfield Fishponds Community School, Specialist Language College status, where it's all happening.
What does it say?
It says it's a brick wall. It feels like a back entrance. The young people, when they arrive at school, we want them to feel that they're coming to a place that they enjoy and they're going to learn in.
We're at the top of A block, which is the main 4-storey block in the school. You can see that it's a very narrow corridor with classrooms either side. 4 stories up, so you can imagine that by the time the children get here, they're somewhat tired, but find themselves quite cramped for space.
As the school's grown, we've had to develop with additional classroom space. So you can see that all around us, some there, some behind me. What that does, of course, is actually disallow sight lines for us to manage the youngsters at breaks to see what's going on.
And they want to be seen.
And they want to be seen all the time, as you can see. So.
All the stairs are of similar construction. They are narrow and steep and tight, and you can imagine that although we have a one-way system, particularly in this main block, that when you have several hundred children moving at any one time between lessons, that can create a potential problem. It's a classic example, really, of how a building dictates the behaviour of the children. There isn't room to move, friction can easily occur, so we have to be constantly vigilant.
At Whitfields, the transformation will be dramatic. A main street will run through the centre of the school. On one side will be the larger spaces, such as halls and drama studios, and on the other will be the classrooms in 3 clusters.
The most important thing, I think, about our designs is that we want this school, this learning community, to be a place that youngsters really want to come to, and that the teachers and other adults that work in the school will enjoy coming to as well. From the moment that people are going to arrive at our school, right up to the entrance, they'll be drawn in, and then when they're inside this fantastic building, they're in the most amazing heated street, and the learning opportunities begin as soon as you get in there.
The new building will put the emphasis on space and safety.
We've arranged, for example, staff work bases at the head of each learning cluster so that we can provide passive supervision for the students. What that means is that they are going to be safe, but they're not guarded, that they can circulate through the school with confidence and ease, but that we have sight lines everywhere. That's been very important to us.
The Whitfield design adopts many of the principles already being used here at the Joe Richardson Community School in Barking. It opened 6 months ago with departments organised into wings, connected by wide open corridors.
A lot of pupil time is actually spent moving from classroom to classroom. We wanted to ensure that we had clear legibility and easy access routes for the movement of pupils around a school. Certainly one of this size, where you've got 1,500 pupils eventually, all moving around, all creating noise and bumping into each other. So we were very keen to ensure that the circulation was clear and legible and sensible.
You ended up with something that looks a little bit like a prison.
Well, I don't quite know how to take that. There's no suicide nets, I grant you. That certainly wasn't the design intent.
But is it a school of the 21st century? The answer is no, according to the architects who built it.
I think from a materials point of view and the way it's been built, it's certainly robust enough to last through the 21st century. From a design point of view, I actually think it's probably a very good 20th century school.
20th century?
I think so. I think ultimately it's still based on teaching models and teaching set-outs of departments, shall we say, which were developed through the 20th century.
So you can't be absolutely sure that the schools you're building now will be suitable in 20, 30 years' time?
There's no way of guaranteeing it. All we can do is to try and design a school that is flexible enough, both the way that it's used and the way that it's maintained, to handle whatever the future throws at it.
Of course, what's driving the changes and creating the uncertainty are all the advances in technology. How can anyone tell what's going to be needed or demanded? They're certainly not pretending to know at Whitfield.
We can't be sure, but we can make as best provision we can towards that certainty. So flexibility was one of the key vision statements that we wanted built into the brief as well. So an example might be that we've got the possibility of, in each learning cluster, opening up 2 classrooms to make them large spaces. So that gives all sorts of possibilities for mini-lecture type approaches for teaching and learning.
The Department for Education and Skills is expecting ICT to be at the heart of BSF. The key word is flexibility, according to the department's head of school capital assets.
I don't think anybody can predict the future, and we at the DFES wouldn't like to pretend that we do either. And those who have in the past have got it wrong. But I think what we can do is really make sure that the buildings that we are building now are flexible and adaptable, so that when the things do change in 20 years' time, the spaces in those buildings could be reconfigured. Perhaps not have too many internal load-bearing walls. I don't think we can second-guess the developments in education and technology, but you can come at it in a different way by making sure that you can adjust without too much disruption and a huge expenditure in 20 years' time.
The Joe Richardson Community School has been designed with spaces that can be adapted. But the feeling here is that despite all the new developments, there isn't going to be much change in the basics.
The argument about how teaching methods are going to change is one that's been around for, decades. People have been talking about the fact that independent learning will become the most important way forward and everyone will be logging onto computers and so on. People have been talking about that since the 60s. It ain't happened. Our view is that the economics of it, never mind the fact that actually children need to integrate and be inspired by other adults and other young people and be inspired by themselves and work together as a group to the whole class moving forward together. That's the thing that actually, if you look back over the last 100 years in education, that hasn't changed.
While ICT has a strong presence and influence, the design of each classroom has been determined by the arrangement of the desks in a single horseshoe instead of rows. It means the rooms had to be bigger and the storage space had to be in the middle.
We went to about 15, 16 recently built schools, including some abroad. One of the things we learned from that process was more about what we didn't want than what we wanted, interestingly. And one of the things we noticed was that what was happening in the design of the classroom was the last thing that seemed to get considered. And having a horseshoe arrangement is something that all of us, subscribe to. We plan our lessons around that sort of basis. One of the things we did was say, well, what do we do about storage? Because in order to get the horseshoe arrangement, you need to use the perimeter as much as possible, which is traditionally where storage is in classrooms, in cupboards and filing cabinets and so on. So we came up with the idea of actually putting the storage in the middle of the classroom on a low level, which works really well because it also gives the teacher a massive surface.
Do you like the way the class is set up in this horseshoe?
Yeah, it's more social, better for the teacher to talk to all of us at once.
Yeah. You're stuck out on the end here.
I don't mind, I can see everyone, so I don't really care. If you're rows in this, you might get stuck behind someone and you'll have to lean to see the teacher or something.
It's a lot easier to teach in this horseshoe because I can see and make eye contact with every single child. So it enables the interactivity of teaching to actually take place, and it's part of the school pedagogy, and a lot of research has went into that, which has enabled more effective teaching and learning to actually take place. Overall, the general working conditions are of such a high standard. It's really nice, and I feel lucky to be able to work in this environment.
So you think it's improved your teaching?
Yes, definitely, because I am more motivated, because I'm in this surrounding. The children seem to enjoy the environment in which they work in. This is an area of East London which is considered to be a low achieving area, and yet the kids work so hard here that it seems to have an impact on their learning. So I think it does actually benefit them. And plus I've worked in some tough schools in Liverpool, so I know that from experience.
Even science classes are arranged in a horseshoe, with pupils moving around pods for group work.
Main advantages is that all the students can see you. I can see all the students at the same time. No one can hide from the teacher's gaze. It also means that the children can also see each other and interact. Now, that would pose some challenges to behaviour. You have to be far more aware of behaviour issues. You have to be aware of when people are distracting one another. But as long as you're aware of those, it makes it actually an easier way to control the class.
Ask pupils what they want out of a classroom, and their demands are much more basic, although there are a few fanciful ideas as well.
I just like buildings that don't have holes in them, and a school where everything actually works.
Chairs that aren't broken.
I want better toilet facilities, because the ones we've got at the moment have got tissue paper stuck to the floor, graffiti on the walls. It's just really disgusting, and everyone holds in to go to the toilet.
I want loads of mirrors and probably rooms where where students could socialise and get their work done at the same time.
What about coffee bar, snooker table?
Yeah, something like that would be nice. And then you don't...
Bowling alley?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cinema?
Yeah. If we could have that, that would be nice as well.